Welcome back to Veal Echo, the channel where the forgotten and the unsettling come alive. Tonight we step into the cobblestone alleys and mist-filled streets of Victorian London, a city where shadows moved differently after midnight and whispers carried warnings no one dared speak too loudly. This is the story of the Victorian creep you've never heard of, but after tonight you won't forget him. Picture the city asleep beneath a thick blanket of fog. The only light comes from gas lamps, their flames sputtering against the damp night air. One flickers, casting shapes that shift unnaturally along the brick walls. In the distance a figure lingers, too still, too patient. At first glance just another man in a coat and top hat, but those who saw him up close spoke of eyes that never blinked and footsteps that echoed long after he was gone. By day, London's grand townhouses looked like the very image of wealth and progress. By night they seemed more like fortresses, ivy crawling up shuttered windows, glass panes reflecting distorted faces in the lamplight. Families locked their doors tighter not out of fear of thieves but because of something far stranger. It wasn't just superstition, it was survival. The newspapers tried to disguise the dread as sensational headlines. Unsolved mystery, strange disappearances continue. A gentleman reading in candlelight might have brushed it off as melodrama, but the details told a darker truth. Victims vanished from well-lit streets, their last known steps traced back to alleys where the gas lamps had mysteriously gone out. Detectives noted claw-like scratches carved deep into doors, and cobblestones stained with something no rain could wash away. Stories spread of a woman in mourning dress walking home alone, her veil fluttering in the breeze. She felt eyes on her back, turned to see nothing, only to find her shadow stretching unnaturally long beneath the gaslight, as if another figure had joined her without sound or breath. Others spoke of abandoned hospitals and shuttered laboratories where the stranger's presence lingered. Beds rusted in the corners, surgical tools coated in dust, and yet the air carried the sensation of being watched. Some swore he was not a man at all but the twisted product of failed experiments hidden away from society. Mirrors played cruel tricks on the fearful. A maid cleaning late at night caught sight of a gaunt figure in her reflection, only to find herself alone when she turned. The description never changed: a pale face, hollow eyes, and a crooked grin barely visible in the fog. London was a city of progress but also a city of shadows. Behind the invention, the elegance, and the wealth, something hunted in silence. Graveyards whispered with strange symbols etched into old stones. Children's toys appeared abandoned in alleys, their cracked eyes staring into the night as if recording secrets. Through it all, the stranger moved quietly, never spoken of in public, always mentioned in hushed tones. Some called him an urban legend, others a demon, but for those who crossed his path, the truth was far simpler. He was real, and he thrived in the fog. Because in Victorian London, the lamps didn't always keep the darkness away. Sometimes they only showed you that something was already standing there, watching. The fog of London was more than a blanket of weather, it was a stage, and the gas lamps were its trembling spotlights. Every flicker, every shadow cast against the brick walls seemed alive. And it was here, in this distorted glow, that the Victorian creep revealed his most haunting tricks. Detectives of the time often spoke of strange markings etched deep into wooden doors. Not scratches from animals or the tools of burglars, but gouges too sharp, too deliberate, as though something with claws had dragged across the grain. A man in a long trench coat once bent down to examine them, candle in hand, only to feel the air grow unnaturally cold. He swore later that he wasn't alone, that a shadow shifted just beyond the circle of light, stretching impossibly long against the walls. The shadow itself became a subject of gossip. Women in the East End told stories of being followed not by footsteps but by silhouettes. One woman described how her own shadow bent unnaturally, sprouting jagged edges as though another presence had attached itself to her form. When she turned toward the source, the gas lamp above her cracked and went dark, leaving only silence. Perhaps the most unsettling tales came from mirrors. A cracked-looking glass in a boarding house reflected not the face of its tenant but a stranger with hollow eyes and a pale, elongated face. The moment the witness turned around, there was nothing, yet the reflection lingered just a moment longer as if mocking the truth. In the graveyards, symbols began to appear, strange, indecipherable markings carved into old stones. Some glowed faintly under the moonlight, though no explanation could be found. Locals believed the creep marked the graves of those he had taken, a tally kept in stone. Few dared to linger after dark among the crooked tombstones where fog rose from the ground like restless spirits. And then there were the children's toys. Small objects left in places they shouldn't be, an abandoned doll on a cobblestone street, one glass eye cracked, staring into the night. A wooden horse left on a church step, wheels broken but fresh mud clinging to it. Those who found them insisted they were offerings, or worse, lures meant to draw the curious closer to the shadows. Eyewitness accounts painted the same figure again and again. A tall man in a ragged coat, his top hat tilted just enough to shroud his features. He never rushed, never ran, he simply appeared, often beneath a failing gaslight as if drawn to the weakest flames. His eyes, when seen, were described as hollow voids, and his smile sharp enough to make even the bravest tremble. Some believed he was a failed experiment from a forgotten laboratory, an unnatural creation abandoned to the city streets. Others swore he was a demon wearing human clothes. But one fact remained: he thrived in the shadows, and the gaslight was never enough to keep him away. And so Londoners learned to fear the night, not because of what they could see, but because of what they couldn't. For in every flicker of the gaslight, every distortion of shadow, the creep was always there, watching, waiting, and whispering from the dark. The whispers grew into a legend, but legends, no matter how deeply buried, always find their way back into the light. The final pieces of the puzzle came not from stories told in taverns or newspapers, but from the places most Londoners dared not enter: abandoned asylums, locked away diaries, and the shadows of forgotten corridors. Imagine stepping into an asylum long left to rot. Wallpaper peels from the walls, wheelchairs rust in corners, and bloodstains linger like ghosts that refuse to fade. In the silence, every creak feels intentional, every draft of cold air feels like a breath. Locals swore that this was where the creep returned when the night's hunt was over, a sanctuary of madness hidden within crumbling stone walls. In the office of a long-dead doctor, preserved jars still lined the shelves. Inside floated fragments of bodies, experiments frozen in time. Among the papers scattered on the desk lay sketches: a tall, skeletal figure with distorted limbs and eyes blackened out in ink. Notes scrawled in panic described a subject beyond control, a man no longer a man. The handwriting trailed off mid-sentence, as though the author hadn't finished before being interrupted. And then came the diary. Bound in cracked leather, its pages revealed the story of the creep not as myth but as truth. The entries spoke of a man who had once been ordinary, a patient, or perhaps a prisoner, subjected to experiments that left him forever changed. His body twisted, his mind shattered, his hunger sharpened into something unholy. By the final pages, the words were almost unreadable, scratched into the paper with trembling hands, describing a monster that could no longer be contained. Witnesses who glimpsed him in his true form described a gaunt figure towering in the fog, with skin stretched too thin across his bones, teeth sharp enough to gleam even in darkness, and eyes like hollow pits. His ragged coat hung from his frame, his top hat tilted as though mocking the very idea of civility. He was a remnant of Victorian London's darkest secrets, a forgotten experiment that had slipped free and made the city his hunting ground. One chilling account told of a woman clutching a candle in her trembling hands, watching shadows move independently of her. When the light struck just right, the creep revealed himself crawling along a wall, limbs bent at impossible angles. She ran, but the sound of his movements echoed far longer than her footsteps. Another described his final moments before vanishing, standing beneath a gas lamp, his pale face visible at last, sharp grin carved across his hollow cheeks. Then, like smoke, he dissolved into the fog, leaving behind nothing but silence and two faintly glowing eyes that lingered just a moment too long. The city never found his body, nor did it ever solve the disappearances that haunted those years. Official records remained quiet, burying the truth beneath bureaucratic indifference. But the people never forgot. To this day, Londoners speak of strange shadows in the mist, of gas lamps that flicker without reason, and of footsteps that echo even when you are alone. Because some figures are too deeply woven into the fabric of fear to ever disappear. The Victorian creep was one of them, a ghost of flesh and shadow, born of cruelty, sustained by dread, and remembered only in whispers. And if you ever walk alone in the fog, take one last look behind you, for the forgotten creep of Victorian London may not be as forgotten as you think.